Okay, so I'm really pleased to um, present our next speaker, who I've been working with quite a lot over the last couple of years, Dr. Jon Chandler from UCL, who is an American historian, and he's going to be talking to us about particularly about the challenges of leading those big courses that many people have to teach when they first start, either teach as part of the group being managed or have to manage themselves. I'm really looking forward to what he has to say. Okay, so I'll just hand over to you now, Jon.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for the invite. Thank you for coming, for everyone for coming. I should say I'm a historian of America, not an American historian, in case the accent throws you. So what I thought I'd talk about today is a little bit about leading large courses, large classes, and what that involves, and how we can kind of think about it from a pedagogical point of view of how we go about teaching these large courses. And I'm going to try and think both from a perspective of if you're teaching sort of what we'd call a lecture to a group, a large group of students, which some of you may be doing over the course of the next academic year or so, and certainly you will be doing it if you pursue a career in higher education. But I also want us to think about from this sort of perspective of seminar teaching, and I know you've had sessions on small group teaching, for example, but thinking about that within the context of a large course and how what you could do within a small class but fits with the wider aims of a larger course. Because I think that's an important thing that we academics often miss, that we're very kind of focused on our minutiae, focused on what we like to teach, and kind of miss the wood for the trees, if you like. So, I mean, about me, I lead our large core courses at UCL, and these are courses around 200, 300 students sometimes. So that's obviously involves kind of teaching large groups, both online in the last kind of few academic years, but also in person, as well as coordinating the teaching sort of in smaller groups across that. So that's working with really large teaching teams of 20 plus people, ranging from sort of early career researchers, PhD students, through to mid-career and late career researchers. And one of the jobs I have is how trying to manage that. I'm not going to talk about the logistics, which is half the problem, but just from the pedagogical point of view, how we kind of ensure everyone's on the same page, so the students are across sort of this big unit of learning are sort of all moving together roughly the same way, and everyone's working on the same page, and that's probably the biggest sort of challenge pedagogically from my point of view. So I suppose that part of me is giving you a glimpse into sort of this sort of module leader kind of insight, which is almost certainly something which you'll be facing at some point in your careers. So in this session, I want to keep it quite as engaging as I can. So I'm going to share my screen in a second. I've got sort of a few Mentimeter polls, which I hope you'll be participating in. There'll be opportunities for discussion and to comment on things either within the context of a Mentimeter, and I've got a Padlet thing later on coming your way as well for us to try and engage discussion. Obviously, if you've got any questions, I'm aiming for about 20 to 30 minutes of sort of me talking and discussion, and then maybe sort of 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A at the end, which would be great if there's any questions or anything that kind of comes up through the session, that you kind of save it for the end, and then we can kind of have questions there. Because if having done too many of these Zoom sessions, I know it's impossible for me to keep an eye on the chat as I'm talking, so I can't do two things at once. But we'll definitely spend some time thinking about some of the issues that come up today. And then obviously, if you're kind of, I guess if anyone's eager to contribute with the raise hand button, that's always welcome as well. So I am going to see if I can share a screen. Here we go. I think that should be all visible to everyone. So what I'm going to talk about today, with only about 20 minutes, I'm keeping myself quite limited, just thinking about what we mean by large classes in the sort of context of higher education generally, as well as in history, to think about some of the challenges of teaching large classes in history specifically, so how we can, what kind of challenges we might face, and then finally evaluate some strategies for teaching these large classes. And these are areas I'm looking forward to your contributions to as well. So a large class is open to interpretation what we mean by a large class. It's often people think about it as anything from 50 above, but really it depends on the context in which you're working. If you're in Australia, it's sort of, my colleagues in Australia are often teaching class sizes of 500 or more. So to them, my large classes, 200, 250 seem quite tiny. 50 is generally just defined as sort of where things become large. Also depends on the subject area. In history, something that is large is not going to be the same as in other disciplines, in the hard sciences or in social sciences. I prefer, if we're going definitions, I prefer just thinking about it as anything large. Something large is anything that requires an adaptation of your usual teaching methods. So that could be if you're trying to teach a tutorial of 4 and you suddenly have to double that to 8 or 10. That's going to be, for the context of a tutorial group, a large class. Similarly, if you're planning and working with a seminar group of 15 and that doubles up to 30, that's suddenly a large class. So I think that's my preferred way of thinking about anything large is anything that requires an adaptation of your normal teaching methods. Large classes in the context of higher education are a response to the neoliberal higher education landscape that we face, where success is measured by student admission numbers, progression numbers, and graduation. And I think the reason I kind of have, I don't think it's a controversial opinion, but having that sort of more politicized point of view is, I think it's just important to get that out of the way. I think a lot of people start from a position of thinking large classes are not the way we would like to teach. And that I think most people would say a smaller class is more fulfilling for us and for students, a way to get to know students better, and we have a more kind of engaged impact with that. And I think probably anyone who's been teaching for a while would probably agree. However, I think a dose of realism is necessary, that this is the environment we're in, where large classes are a response to the environment, and in most higher education contexts internationally are crucial to the financial sustainability of the university, effectively. Put it bluntly, the large classes I teach, 250, 300 students, frees up colleagues to teach smaller groups elsewhere in our degree curriculum, and that is essentially the purpose of them. It is purely kind of financial from that point of view. So instead of I suppose having the kind of the moral discussion of whether we think large classes are right or not, I guess I want to kind of move beyond that. Except large classes are a norm in, I think, almost every university in the world, and aren't going anywhere. And actually, let's think about how we can try and teach large classes in a way that we can try and improve the delivery of our teaching, and that we can try and have more effect. And some of the things that we perhaps think are reserved for small group teaching in terms of building relationships, developing active learning activities and things like that, even though we perhaps would be more comfortable with them in a small group environment, these are things we can do in a large class, and we can do them quite effectively as well. So that's, I suppose, my political point of view, if you like. Large classes are generally more prevalent in the early years of a degree, and I talk about this kind of across disciplines, not just in history, but overall it tends to be that large classes are put in the first year and second year more predominantly. I think this is because when we're designing curricula in almost any context, it's seen as in the first year and second year, it's building up sort of knowledge and providing sort of a baseline of knowledge, which large classes are more suited to. Whereas in year 2, year 3, year 4, it's more about developing a specialism and developing your critical thinking, which perhaps requires smaller groups traditionally as the big. So it's kind of an idea that large groups are better for the more general basic knowledge base, if you like, whereas small groups are better for the sort of, development of specialty and critical thinking. Again, as you'll probably pick up as we go through, that's another area where I think there's perhaps an issue, just in the sense of the idea that we can't do critical thinking in a large class, that we can't do sort of developing analysis and specialist thinking within a large class, and that large classes are only good for knowledge delivery. And that's something which I would like you to walk away at least questioning it. In the context of history, I know you had a session yesterday on history lecture, so I don't want to repeat anything that was said there. But in the context of history, large classes I generally describe as either a survey, so something that focuses on providing coverage of the history of a region and or a period. In my field, you know, the United States or the United States surveys are always very popular. These are courses that I think, again, in my experience, students really like them because they it chimes to them about what history is about. It's kind of about a narrative. I mean, in the, US history, revolution to civil war to civil rights, that kind of thing. It's something they've studied largely in that way in school, where it's the school curriculum, A-level curriculum, UC curriculum. It kind of follows a similar kind of survey. And the surveys tend to lean again towards this idea of just providing knowledge, that as the lecturer, the academic, you're the gatekeeper of the knowledge of this particular regional period. In the same way, I introduced myself as an early Americanist or an Americanist. I'm the gatekeeper of this knowledge, which in the course of my 20 lectures, you will receive this knowledge, which as we go, I think that's a little bit of a problematic way of thinking about it. And B, a kind of related way in which our large courses are often presented is as a core course. So we're providing core information, focusing on developing key historical skills. And that's, again, they're found in many parts of the history curriculum now. And most universities will have a writing method, a writing skills course, a historical methods course, historiography, theory, that kind of thing. And these courses, again, predominantly focus on first years. And it's the idea of providing this kind of a base of both, whether that's kind of the survey course providing a base of kind of historical content, and the course providing a baseline of historical skill, which the idea is year 2, year 3, students build upon in their smaller groups as they progress. And so that's kind of, I think, largely how large classes fit into sort of higher education and history curriculum. Specifically, even though I'm sure I'm generalizing massively. So I kind of wanted to throw open the Mentimeter question to you. So you can go to menti.com, use that code, copy this link, which I will attempt to put in the chat. I can raise the chat. So if you hop over, enter into that link, or you can use the instruction at the top. And you should hopefully see a poll if you'll be involved in the teaching of large classes this academic year. Now, as people vote, I'm going to, I'll spoil the results, but say, almost certainly the answer is going to be yes, I would think. Even if you're not directly teaching a large group in the sense of delivering a lecture, which I would probably be surprised if you're doing that in the audience that I'm expecting, where this is perhaps your first year of teaching. I expect it's only a minority of you who are involved in directly teaching or coordinating a large group. I wouldn't expect that to be a large number. But I expect the majority of you will be responsible for teaching a small group within a large group. So teaching a section. In the United States, they often call them discussion sections. Here we tend to call them tutorials or seminars, that you'll be teaching a seminar group associated with a survey course or a core course, where there is a larger lecture delivered by a module leader or delivered by various academic staff, and you'll be involved in delivering a seminar group, and you'll be responsible for that. And I don't want to repeat sessions you've had on small group teaching, but instead what I want us to think about is the issues involved with teaching within this kind of large group context, which is how our students see it. Our students, don't disassociate your small group tutorial from the lecture they've had in a related course. They see it as one course. So even though you might not even attend the lecture, you might not have anything to do with the lecture, and you see what you're teaching is a completely separate thing, but the students won't see that. And I think that's an important thing for us to address. So I'll have a peek at the results now. And that's come in, I think, roughly as expecting, actually, with 8 yes being involved. It'd be interesting to know if you're going to be involved directly with teaching a large class in the context of giving a lecture or running a session with a large group, however you like to define that. 13 saying no, although as I said, I expect actually on reflection you might be and then 5 unsure. So I'm going to move to a second Mentimeter. This one asking, what challenges might you face with teaching in this large class context? This one's an open field question. So I'll give you a sort of 250 character box, I think, to write an answer on. So I'll let you just reflect for a second on the challenges you might face with teaching within a large class. Again, a very diverse group here, and I obviously don't know your backgrounds completely. So I want us to think in the broad way that I've outlined, both in terms of large can be really any, a 10-person, a 10-group class is going to be large if you're used to teaching 4, or if you've kind of got courses designed for 4 students. One of the classes I lead on is called Writing History. It's one of these core courses, and we have I see a few of my tutors in the room actually, and that's one where the course is very much designed for a small group environment of 5 or 6. It's tutorial teaching, and in the context of that class, if I was told by the university that I had to up my class sizes to 10, that would fundamentally change the course. It would be make everything incredibly different. So I was going to think about these kind of challenges within the numbers, as well as challenges thinking broadly both about whether it's delivering a session to a large group, such as the one which we're doing today, as well as the challenges with teaching perhaps a smaller group, but within the context of it. So I'll have a look through. So, and please do keep ideas coming in. Ensuring appropriate levels of differentiation and inclusivity for the individual student. Yeah, absolutely. As I hinted at the beginning, I think that's one of the key issues in terms of, which is often the key distinction. I'm glad that one came first, actually, between small group and large group, is how we understand and engage with our students when we have 200, even 67 in this context, which in a small group is possible. In a large group is difficult, but not impossible, as I talk about, but difficult. Catering to different learning speeds as well. Could say I'm not a huge fan of learning style, but definitely could also add in catering to different preferred methods of learning as well. Difficult to assess if everyone is understanding the material. Absolutely difficult to do formative assessment. Kind of use polls like this, but this is particularly, as you know, we saw from the last one, we've got 67 people in here. In this one, 67 people and only 16 people have contributed. Not unusual in a class. So it's difficult to assess the majority of students. Constructing relationships with students, absolutely. Integrating the leading of seminars into the overall module. Yep, I think that's definitely something that I've got a section on we'll talk about later, of how we go about thinking about our seminars within the context of this module, especially if you don't, as sort of someone who's teaching for the first time, you might not have any say or control or influence or even understanding the module, depending on how the course has been designed. So it can be very difficult to think about how they're related to it. And we will talk about some strategies for that later on. Engaging students, keeping everyone engaged, making sure they're connected with the students. Absolutely, these are really important themes. I'm really glad we're picking up on. Yeah, the disconnect between survey lectures and associated seminar groups is a really important one, which again we'll talk about a little bit of the intellectual difference. There's also one which is, I don't think anyone's seen, which is even the physical one, in the sense of often they're spread across a week or different days. I'm sure if you haven't taught before, you must have experienced that as a student, of having a survey lecture and a seminar lecture split around, and maybe classes in between. I taught once where I did the seminar before the lecture because of the timetabling. So I had to do a seminar related to a lecture before the students had a lecture, which completely changed how I could teach that seminar compared to a different seminar, the seminar which came afterwards. So these kind of things which are out of our control and belong to the gods of timetabling and administration are something which can really affect our teaching in large groups. Distractions, again, with every class might have that, but particularly within large groups, which creates a sense of anonymity for students. If you're teaching online, you absolutely feel completely anonymous. But even with an in-person lecture, it creates the sense of anonymity in the back, where you can sleep, talk, watch cricket. Google me. I've had one because I roam around a lecture. I sometimes see students looking at me on the internet, which is very weird. Managing the classroom, absolutely. Harder to build connection with students and monitoring engagement. I'm really glad these are coming up quite repeatedly. Yeah, getting to know students as an individual. Lack of authority, some students being disruptive. Practical consideration. I mean, one would like to think that doesn't happen with undergraduates, that they're too mature for that, but particularly in first years, that is still an issue. I've trusted you with my Mentimeter that I'm not moderating it, but with my first year undergrads, I do moderate the Mentimeter because I've had students again abusing anonymity to write unpleasant things. Let's just say that, and if there's something as simple as that, we sort of have to consider. Yeah, accommodating for different paces of learning, absolutely. And thinking about how we kind of engage with students, absolutely. So I see engagements coming up as I think probably the most important theme, which I'm really glad we've got that, but a few other interesting themes coming through as well, thinking about how we structure our teaching and how we cater to different students. So these are the three broad themes that I've kind of picked up when I was thinking about this. So I think, I purposely always plan this in a way. So firstly, large classes can reduce students to passive recipients of knowledge rather than active learners. I think that's a little bit of my theme in the first, my first sort of slide, thinking about trying to get away from a large group being all that a large group can do is just receive knowledge. All we can do with a large group is tell them things, much as I'm talking at you. And that is all we can do. And actually, we can't shift towards active learning when we're using a large group. And it's absolutely more difficult, but it's, I think, something which we should be striving to do to push towards active learning. The second one, I think, is something which is very strong in the Mentimeter slide just now. We are all picking up on large classes to make it really difficult to address student diversity and personalised learning. And without going into the literature too much, we know, I think, from our own personal experiences, that the way we learn best is when we feel like we have a personal connection to the topic, or we feel like this is something which, as an individual, and it doesn't have to be anything, wild. It doesn't have to be kind of, because it's a topic about me personally, but it's just there is a personal connection there, and that you feel like the learning is speaking to you and your learning style, your learning speed, as we talked about, say, previous class, and that's hard to do in a large class when you're dealing with potentially even tens, if not hundreds of different students. But it is something which I think, again, we should strive to do, and we shouldn't just kind of say, oh, it's impossible, so I'm not going to attempt it. And then number three, which is one I don't think anyone picked up on, this one which is kind of something I did want to focus on, largely because of my experience of teaching these large team talk courses where I'm dealing with 20, 30 members of staff, ranging from PhD students teaching for the first time who are in this room, through to postdocs, early career, mid-career professors, and how that can create disparities in student learning, which no one else picked up, but I think is potentially an issue. If we're going to rank the 3 points I've raised, which one do you think is the most important? Which one do you think is the least important? Give you a couple of minutes. You can go to the Menti and have an attempt at ranking them in a particular order. It's closer than I thought it would be, I have to say. I'm just quite enjoying watching this move. This is where the drama of Zoom is heightened, because I made a prediction before this, what I thought you would say. So I want to see if it I feel as the I'll let the slide continue, but this is a perfect moment to stop, because this is what I predicted. I don't know if you can see, I even wrote it down there. This is what I predicted, that you would say active learning first, so that as we have at number 1, large students can reduce students to passive recipients of knowledge rather than active learning. I thought you would say that is the most important challenge. I thought you would say that the large class can make it difficult to address student diversity as the second challenge. And I thought some way behind, probably further behind than it is, I thought would be the team teaching. Why did I say that? And I'm very chuffed with myself that I was right. And why did I think that? Because I think as teachers, this is what we think. We think, particularly teachers, teachers, if you've gone through various training programs either today and yesterday or in your institution, have probably had active learning dumped into you. And obviously active learning is important. And from our point of view, is thinking of, as an educator, how am I supposed to be kind of engaging with the student? You think, yeah, I want to design my course to be active learning. And then short behind, we're thinking about the importance of engaging with students and personalizing their learning. And that's an important one in the last slide. And team teaching is something which we didn't even think about, is reduced to third. However, I think I need to do some research on this. I haven't polled my students properly. But my feeling from students is that students would put it, would flip it and have it opposite. I think the students' main issue is inequality. It's the idea of people having a different experience to them. That someone is being taught by X and I'm being taught by Y. Someone covered this in their class and I didn't cover it. I think that is their biggest concern with these large courses, that everyone is not getting the same experience. Again, we can complain about the neoliberal higher education environment that's created this, but I think rather than going down that route, just need to accept that is perhaps the issue they're dealing with, and then that is not an insignificant concern for students. Then I think in second, students have the same one in the sense of that they think that they want to have a personalized learning experience. They want to have a class that addresses them. So I think that is definitely their sort of second priority. I feel this is a research project coming up. And then my feeling is that what we rank as educators, what we rank as number 1 is actually the students' lowest priority. Because I think students quite like being a passive recipient of knowledge. It is much easier to be a passive learner within a lecture than it is to be an active learner. Students, and in my course feedback, so often I see students complaining about how entertaining a lecture is. They like my lectures if they're entertaining. They don't like a lecture that is not entertaining. And students, we are not, we are not a Netflix program. They're not there just to sit back and consume our lectures. We want them to be active. Learning requires a certain level of cognitive load, which is challenging for students, but actually a lot of them are uneager to take that step. Again, I'd say that's probably why 30 of you haven't been contributing to my mentoring, probably because it's, requires a bit more effort. So I really think that's part of this kind of issue that we're dealing with, is what students think is most significant is not to see what we think is most significant. So there's perhaps a little bit of a disparity there. How am I doing for time? I've done about 25 minutes and I want to get to the end. So I've got one last sort of interactive feature. Moving over to Padlet now. So let me just pop over the link for Padlet to make sure this is not with these learning technologies. Here's our Padlet. I want to think how we might address some of these challenges in our teaching. So you can pop over to this Padlet. There's also a QR code if you're on a phone. That should take you there. I confess I didn't have time to test it. QR code that should take you there. And shall we see which one we think is, if we've got any suggestions for how we might address these challenges in our teaching. Are the Padlet posts coming across in the Mentimeter? I'm going to make sure that as I switch windows, that's coming across all right. thank you everyone who's contributing so far. I'll start taking a look through. How I can't able to scroll down. So talking about how I'm enjoying everything I've been through. I should probably start with number one. So we have thinking about interactive components in lectures. Absolutely. I'll provide the technical term for interactive components in a little bit. Breaking the class down into smaller groups. In my experience, I found that worked really well in a physical lecture. Really struggle with it in a Zoom lecture. That's why I didn't do it today with you guys. But I think it's actually I've really struggled with breakout rooms in a large lecture environment. It's the sort of the social inhibition of talking in a breakout room when you've been, when you're not expecting it is a massive problem. And unlike a lecture theatre, as a lecturer, you can't sort of really facilitate them in the same way that you can in a lecture. Encouraging debate. Yeah, sort of ask this think, pair, share, asking students to talk to their neighbour. Yeah, using a hook to engage with students, a video, open questions, something unexpected. I also think, that speaks to number two of using different methods to engage with student learning, not expecting everyone's going to respond to me talking or to a text, providing different forms of accessing information. Yeah, but I do like a good joke. Again, I think that kind of goes to sort of number two. I think one way of personalizing learning is to put some of your personality and make, it's impossible for you to kind of get to know all your students in a 200-person class. Even a 50-person class is going to take you a while, if at all. So using a sort of trying to kind of get around that by providing your own personality there, I think is important. Asking students to lead discussions, absolutely. And I'll flip over to number two now. Providing different types of assessment activities. Absolutely, that's very important. Make students fill in exit slips to get feedback. Yep, actually, in feedback, something which I'm not going to be discussing today at all, but I think that's a really important point as well. Research in the group, absolutely. I'll come back to that in a second. I think even in a group of 200, you can still learn some of your students' names. You can still learn a little bit about their backgrounds. You're not going to manage it for 200 or 300 or however many, and you're not going to manage it instantly, but you can learn some of your students' names. And as simple as it sounds, that makes a difference within a large group. Major techniques, running polls to understand. Yeah, these, I think, especially when, if you can encourage your students to kind of engage with them and providing different ways, as I'm kind of attempting to follow this, finding different ways for students to contribute. So obviously some students will be eager and willing and want to engage directly in a lecture, whether it's online or offline, and some will be much more comfortable providing anonymous feedback like this. Some might prefer to provide sort of feedback which is more formal through kind of feedback earlier up, feedback slips and things like that. So providing different opportunities. Oh, yeah, there we go. Office hours as well. Different resources. Yeah, providing guest lecturers as a way to provide kind of different. And I actually quite like team teaching. Actually, as a way of doing this, of having. Problem with guest lecturers is they can go rogue. You never know what you're going to get. But bringing in people, if we can sort of co-teaching classes, I always think it's quite a good way to go. And then how I do it for time. I've got about 15 minutes left, I think. So, online shared document with teachers, share lesson plans. Yeah, so this is thinking about how we can overcome some perhaps the issues of team teaching. Yep, I think peer review is really important. Something I encourage all my teachers to do. I think variety is important. Like you're not going, and everyone teaches in a different way. So it's impossible. I would never want to say this is exactly sort of the uniform. Everyone has to do this kind of approach of teaching, kind of the academization as we say in secondary school sometimes, where lessons are planned out minutely and everyone has to deliver the same thing. I think that is not the way to go. So I think you've got to accept that as variety. But as I'm hoping will come down, yep, you need to communicate what it is that's being taught. I think you need to think about ensuring that the important points are coming through, that you are sort of viewing each other's teaching Yeah, common baselines, that's a really good phrase. Yeah, this is having more teaching and training. This is something I'll touch on this in my final slides. I think that's a really important point. It's something it's one of those difficult things where if you're a PhD student, your module convener is not willing to do that, it puts you in a difficult place. And I perhaps talk about some of the things you can do, but I do think that is a really important one. I encourage sort of academics to have weekly meetings. We have weekly meetings in those courses I teach. We have a Teams site, kind of, Teams channel for just kind of ongoing chat and questions and things like that, which I think works quite well. So consistent meetings. I like that phrase, move as a herd, ensure we're on the same kind of page with module aims, key guidance, etc. Asking students feedback, more training. Yeah, some really good points here. And that's really, I think, I just kind of want to sum up the thoughts I had, which I think may be going repeating and maybe reinforcing and maybe offering some new things. So I think the first one, how to encourage active learning within these large classes. Designing teaching around learning activities rather than knowledge acquisition is something which is easier said than done. And it means, in a way, if your lesson planning takes longer, it's easy to think, oh, I'm just going to tell someone about the American Revolution, 1776, 78, maybe a bit on the Declaration of Independence. But think about, okay, what am I actually wanting students to do in this exercise, and actually planning it around the activities rather than around the knowledge. I've kind of tried to model it in a small way with this. I've planned the session around the activities I wanted you to do rather than what I'm planning on telling you. Thinking about different activities we talked about sort of before, which came up, I think classroom polling techniques, whether it's old-fashioned pieces of paper or it's using Mentimeter or something like that. Think, pair, share works well. Providing a problem, sort of problem-based learning, which I won't go into too much, but providing students a problem to solve within, and essentially structuring a lesson, a lecture around solving that problem, and that is the focus rather than on the knowledge that you're giving. One which I'm very strongly in favor of is actually providing students writing exercises. I think critical thinking is a misnomer. We don't just think critically. Critical thinking criticality comes through writing, particularly in something like history. And in a way, it's all very well asking students to think, pair, and share, which is a great, easy exercise. But I think the next step is to ask them, okay, write down your ideas, then go back and reflect, discuss them further, and rewrite. And I think I obviously do that in my core writing modules, but I do that in all modules, encouraging students to write something and essentially have something, ideally with a pen if you're forced to do that. I think that's better than typing. Collaborative annotation technologies, which is another way of involving students in actually writing their ideas down. In one of my modules, kind of adopting a team-based learning, which is sort of a distinct type of learning design where you put students into groups from day one. They're working with their group on a project. So again, it's a bit like problem-based learning, but whereas problem-based learning is within one lecture or class, team-based is across a module. And okay, where you are now, there might not be a huge amount you can do about this if you're not involved in planning a lecture. But I think you can think about, as a seminar leader or tutorial leader, how you can design small group activities within your seminar or tutorial that you're leading that actually consolidate the large group teaching, that actually will kind of develop the points that have been covered in the lecture rather than sitting kind of separately from it. And as I'm running out of time, I won't say any more than that. We can always discuss in the Q&A. A second point that I wanted to talk about, thinking about strategies to embrace diversity, personalized learning. I think we were very strong on this as a group, thinking the barriers that students overcome, teaching and learning. And I think this is the important thing, providing different options for student perception, expression, and comprehension. So I suppose that's a fancy way of thinking about different options for how students can learn. So not just talking, not just providing text, providing images, providing videos, providing different online, offline opportunities for learning, different ways for students to express that learning, whether that's through discussion, through writing, through polls. Like, different people will prefer different things, and the best way is to use lots of different varieties and provide lots of different options. And ditto with comprehension, by which I kind of mean assessment, provide different options for assessment. Again, you may not have the power to change, and even I don't have the power to change this our end of end of course assessments, which are often decided way above, but you do generally have the power to change the formative assessment you do. And I strongly recommend people within seminars think about and lectures each week, what a student's going to produce this week in this lecture. Is it a page of notes? Is it a draft introduction? Is it a sentence? This kind of thing, and having a physical thing, usually a piece of writing, a physical thing that they have produced, and that will show their understanding, even if it's not something you are necessarily going to go and assess, but it's something that the students have to show their learning. An important point which didn't really come up, I think, is reducing anonymity, even when these large groups, learning and using student names whenever possible, learning about students. I've had a wonderful guest lecturer who's, has 200 students he's never seen before. He comes in and he learns student names as he goes, and he refers to them throughout the lecture. And it makes a huge difference, not just to the student who's being mentioned, but also to the entire room, who suddenly feel like, okay, this guy actually wants to get to know us. He's not doing this, this is not just an hour wasted of his time. He's actually wanting to engage with us. And obviously that's something within a lecture you can do, but also within your online learning environment. If you're using any kind of online tools, you can engage with your students there. It's much easier when they have their names floating above their screen. Building community, providing opportunity for pair discussion, group work, online spaces. And again, even if you don't have the power to control this as a seminar leader, what kind of different options can you provide them to access the module material within the seminar that you're doing? And again, thinking of your seminar as part of their students' learning experience. If they've had someone talking for them 2 hours about a topic, what can you do to provide perhaps a different option to access that material? And then finally, my last slide, thinking about these team-based teaching techniques that we can use to enhance student learning. And I think a lot of this was raised on the Padlet, in the move of the herd, but understand everyone in the teaching team understands their learning outcomes. That's the crucial thing. That each week you know what the learning outcome is, both for the module as a whole, but also for each individual session. And in a way, when I'm planning these things, I very much want tutors to go in their own direction with how they design their module. But the only thing I kind of mandate is this is what I want students to have produced this week. This is the aim we've got for this class, and I want them to have produced X. And that's the destination is fixed. How we get there, entirely up to you. Discover where you're able to provide students with different options to access the topic, even if you can't redesign a module, but how can you, what can you do to provide different options to learn? Collaborating with peers, again, this is an answer to the question of someone I think who said, what if my module convener doesn't want to meet with you? And that's possibly a problem. But my answer is, I'm sure you're not the only person in that position. Either if you're lucky and you have 2 or 3 or more people teaching on the module there, but your instant support group. But if you have people, PGTAs or similar early career teachers who are teaching in your department or in your area, I think that's collaborating and talking through your ideas is a really important activity. So as a seminar leader, how can you work with your team to support your students? And trying to think of it's not academics, we like to silo ourselves and work alone. Teaching, particularly these large groups, is absolutely a team exercise, and trying to use the support that you have, I think, will benefit your students and will benefit you. That is everything I wanted to cover, and I've only got a little bit over that I wanted to do, but we've still got a little bit of time left for questions. So I'm going to wrap up there. And if there's any questions in the room, please don't be afraid to raise the old hand or type into the chat. The Padlet will remain, Sue. I can keep the Padlet for a while. I can copy and paste it into the slides and give them to Jamie to share around as well.
Thanks so much, John. That was great, and it gives a real insight into the challenges that we face when we're actually kind of trying to engage these large groups almost in a non-lecture based environment, but where there's lots of them, and how we kind of manage all of that. That was great, and some great ideas. And also, it was great that you were practicing what you were sort of preaching.
I did try
on a sort of meta level. Excellent. So, does anyone have any any questions, please do, or comments. Some thank yous coming in the chat, but any other thoughts that people would like to put into the chat? Yeah, I don't know if you're reading that one, John, or do you want me to read it out?
You can read it out as well.
Okay. As module convener, is there anything you would recommend for a new teaching assistant starting on a large module in terms of making sure your teaching fits into the overall structure of the module? That's from Eddie.
I think the most useful thing that a module convener can do with a TA is, I think, as up on the palette, is to meet. I would say weekly, at least, depending on how the teaching is structured. If the TA is teaching every week, I think having a weekly meeting. If they're teaching in blocks, then meeting throughout that time period. So I meet with TAs at least the week before teaching starts, if not before. And basically each week we kind of just have a chat about both, obviously, what I'm going to be covering in the sort of the lecture content, so that doesn't come as a surprise, but also then how that can develop, how the TA can develop that within their own teaching, and obviously answer any questions, particularly if it's someone who's teaching for the very first time. A lot of sort of practical questions. You know, how do I reach this learning objective? Do you have any suggestions for things to do, that kind of thing? So I think a regular meeting like that, because I'm often having kind of these large teams. So yeah, we have a team site, which we kind of use as sort of a forum for people to share lesson plans, share ideas. I really think one of the things is trying not to be too possessive over your teaching materials. That can be difficult because people feel like, oh, when you put a lot of time into things that you own it. But I very much try and encourage people to be magpies and steal things wherever possible. And I'm more than happy to share ideas of things I've done without, saying this is what you have to do. But with having taught a lot of these courses for several years now, I've got a lot of sort of ideas of my own of things that I've done. And obviously I've had a lot of TAs and postdocs working on these courses who have their own ideas. So we've kind of, over time, have collated sort of a large document of different suggested activities, which I also circulate to TAs on the course. So it's something that they can kind of have as a starting point to say, oh, it's kind of, the Bible for these courses. This is kind of the learning aims, this is the outcome we want. And here are some of the different paths people over the years have taken to get there. You can, if you want to if there's a prescriptive route, if you want to follow it, but there's different ways you can go as well. I think that works well with these, with these large modules where there's a lot of teaching going on. I think if it's just, you with one TA, I think that would probably be a bit overkill. You don't need to do that. But I think, having a conversation at least and sort of working through some of these ideas in a more informal way, I think would work really well.
Michael's got a good idea there about sort of like, again, like a shared sort of repository of stuff that people can refer to. I think what Michael and John are describing is really good practice, and in an ideal world, that's how everybody does this. But it may be that you might experience, you might be receiving slightly less support if you're a TA, associate lecturer, or work. They're called different things at different institutions. And I think the really an important thing to emphasize is the responsibility of the module leader, really, in most institutions, to make sure that the people that are delivering the small classes on their modules are prepared. So it really it's getting in touch with them and talking to them, and also in a way that they'll be the ones who'll be measured, sort of at the end of the day in terms of results and evaluations and stuff like that. So I think making sure that you manage upwards in a way is important.
Yeah, very much agree.
Awesome. Great stuff. So thanks so much, John. That was great.